In 1912, the Titanic wasn't just the largest moving object ever built by mankind. It was a promise. The promise of an unstoppable future. For some, it was the promise of a new life in America, carrying everything they owned in a single trunk. For others, it was the promise of the ultimate luxury money could buy. A floating palace, where millionaires dined on oysters while the ship cut through the Atlantic at 23 knots. But that promise had a price that defined exactly who you were in that world. Your ticket wasn't just passage across the ocean. It was your identity, your worth, your chance. Today, we're going to break down the numbers behind the legend. How much did a ticket to the dream actually cost? And more importantly, what would that same money buy you today? The answer reveals more than you imagine. It reveals the price we put on human life itself. Because when the Titanic sank, the price of your ticket determined whether you lived or died. And that uncomfortable truth is frozen in history, waiting for us to understand it. Let's start where most of the ship started, third class, steerage, the bottom deck. This is where over half of Titanic's passengers traveled. Not tourists, not thrill seekers, people betting everything on a new beginning. A third-class ticket cost between £7 and £9, roughly $35 to $40 at the time. That doesn't sound like much until you realize what it meant. For a laborer in 1912, that was 2 to 3 months of wages. For a factory worker, it might be 6 months of savings. This wasn't vacation money. This was life-changing money. The kind you save for years, sell everything you own, borrow from relatives. The ticket was an investment in hope. And what did that $40 buy? A bunk bed in a cabin shared with up to 10 strangers. Communal bathrooms down the hall. Meals served in a plain dining room, simple but filling. Porridge for breakfast, stew for dinner, bread and tea. It wasn't luxury, but for many, it was better than what they'd left behind. Better than the overcrowded tenements of Europe. Better than the hunger. The third-class passengers had access to a deck at the stern of the ship. They could walk, breathe fresh air, see the endless ocean. For immigrant families leaving everything behind, that was enough. That was the promise. Now let's translate that to today. Adjusted for inflation, that $40 ticket is worth roughly $1,300 to $1,500 in modern money. What does that buy you today? A one-way international economy flight. Maybe New York to London if you book in advance. Maybe less if you're flying budget. You'd arrive in 6 hours, cramped and uncomfortable, and you'd forget the journey the moment you landed. But for them, that $1,500 was everything. It was the price of hope, the cost of starting over. And unlike us, they couldn't forget the journey. Because for 1,500 of them, the journey ended in freezing water. Now let's move up. Second class. The bridge between two worlds. The world of necessity and the world of opulence. A second-class ticket cost between £12 and £20, $60 to $100. That was a significant jump. And for that extra money, you got a very different experience. Second-class cabins were private, 2 to 4 people, not the 10. You had a small porthole window, a wash basin in your room, actual furniture, a sofa, a writing desk. The dining room was elegant, with white tablecloths and multi-course meals, roast beef, potatoes, vegetables, dessert. You ate like a respectable person, not a refugee. Second class had access to a library, a promenade deck. You could walk the ship and feel like you belonged there, not like you were being tolerated. These were school teachers, engineers, clergymen, small business owners. The professional middle class. They weren't rich, but they had dignity. And on the Titanic, that dignity had a price. $100 in 1912 is worth about $3,200 to $3,500 today. What does that buy? A week-long luxury cruise in the Caribbean, all-inclusive, or a round-trip business class ticket to Europe. You'd have legroom, a real meal, a glass of wine. You'd arrive rested, not exhausted. That was second class, not extravagant, just comfortable. The price of traveling with dignity and arriving like a human being, not cargo. But here's the thing. Second class on the Titanic was better than first class on most other ships. The second-class library on Titanic had more books than some small-town libraries. The dining room had better food than restaurants on land. White Star Line wanted to prove that even their middle-class passengers traveled like the elite. And on that freezing April night, second-class passengers had a better chance than third, not because they were better people, because they were closer to the lifeboats. Now we arrive at first class, the apex, the floating monument to wealth. A standard first-class cabin started at £30, $150. But that was just the beginning. If you wanted one of the parlor suites, the best rooms on the ship, you paid £870, $4,350. Let that sink in. In 1912, the average American worker made about $500 per year. The price of one first-class suite was nearly 9 years of wages for a common laborer. It was more than most people would see in a lifetime. And what did that money buy? A private suite with multiple rooms, bedrooms, a sitting room, a private promenade deck where you could walk without seeing another soul. A fireplace, real wooden furniture, silk curtains. A personal bathroom with hot and cold running water, a luxury most homes didn't have. You had a private butler, 24-hour service, anything you wanted, whenever you wanted it. Meals were 11 courses, oysters, lobster, lamb, quail, champagne, caviar, wine from France, cigars from Cuba. The menu changed every night, but the standard never dropped. You were dining better than at the finest restaurants in New York or London. First-class passengers had access to everything. A swimming pool, a Turkish bath, a squash court, a gymnasium with the latest equipment, a smoking room with leather chairs and mahogany panels, a reading room, a Parisian cafe. You could spend a week on the ship and never see the same room twice. These were people like John Jacob Astor IV, one of the richest men in the world. Benjamin Guggenheim, mining magnate. Isidore Straus, co-owner of Macy's department store. Margaret Brown, later called the unsinkable Molly Brown. They weren't just rich, they were the architects of the modern world, and the Titanic was their playground. Now let's do the math. $4,350 in 1912 is worth roughly $140,000 to $150,000 today. What could you buy with that? A brand new Porsche 911, not used, off the lot. Or you could put a down payment on a luxury apartment in a major city. Or, and this is the irony, you could buy a ticket on Virgin Galactic's suborbital spaceflight. The modern equivalent of the Titanic. The latest, greatest, most expensive way to prove you've made it. But the first-class passengers on the Titanic weren't just buying transportation, they were buying isolation. Separation from the masses below. A world where they didn't have to see poverty, didn't have to think about struggle, didn't have to acknowledge that most of humanity lived very differently. Until the night of April 14th. When the ocean reminded everyone that physics doesn't care about your bank account. On the night of April 14th, 1912, at 11:40 p.m., all those prices became meaningless. John Jacob Astor's millions couldn't buy him a seat in a lifeboat. But here's the brutal truth. Your ticket still mattered. The numbers don't lie. Let me show you what the price of your ticket actually bought. Women in first class, 97% survived. Almost all of them made it. Women in third class, 46% survived, less than half. Men in first class, 33% survived, 1 in 3. Men in third class, 16% survived, 1 in 6. Why? Because the price you paid determined how close your cabin was to the boat deck. It determined whether crew members guided you to safety or locked the gates to keep you below. It determined whether you even knew what was happening before it was too late. Third-class passengers were trapped behind locked gates. They were told to wait, to stay calm, that everything was under control. By the time those gates opened, the lifeboats were gone. First-class passengers were woken by stewards, escorted to the deck, and helped into boats while third-class families were still trying to find a way up. The Titanic had lifeboat capacity for 1,200 people. There were 2,200 aboard. Someone was going to die, and the price of your ticket determined whether that someone was you. Benjamin Guggenheim knew he wasn't getting off, so he and his valet changed into evening wear. "We've dressed in our best," he said, "and are prepared to go down like gentlemen." That's the story we remember. Noble, dignified. But down in third class, mothers drowned holding their children. Families were separated in the chaos and never saw each other again. Men who'd saved for years to bring their families to America watched them disappear into the black water. No one tells those stories, because they don't fit the legend. The Titanic wasn't a tragedy. It was a sorting machine, and your ticket was your number. The story of the Titanic is a story of numbers. The size, the speed, the lives lost. But the story of its tickets is the story of the value we place on human life. A lesson frozen in time. A reminder that no matter the price we pay, in the end, we all face the same ocean. The uncomfortable truth is that we still live in a world where the price you pay determines your chances. Better healthcare, better education, better safety. The Titanic isn't history, it's a mirror. And if you look close enough, you'll see that we're still selling tickets to the same ship. History doesn't repeat, but if you ignore it, it will crush you all the same. If this changed how you see the Titanic or the world we live in, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.